In a distant land where a man's word decides a woman's fate, Dilara was given away as a wife in exchange for fertile lands, never imagining that, on their wedding night, Prince Halil would do something unthinkable. Can a promise of freedom turn into true love? When duty and desire come face to face, the choice can change everything. Hidden secrets, palace intrigues, and hearts that beat in silence are waiting to be revealed in this story filled with passion and courage. Before we begin, tell me, where in the world are you listening from? Do you believe true love can be born from the most impossible circumstances? Make yourself comfortable and join me in uncovering this story.
Karaman, 1854. The wind that descends from the Anatolian mountains sweeps across the dry land like an ancient sigh, carrying with it the dust of centuries and the broken promises of desperate men. At the top of the valley, the governor's palace rises like a jewel carved from white marble, cold and silent, where the fate of a young woman is about to be sealed without her voice ever being heard. Dilara traveled in a closed carriage, flanked by two armed riders who remained silent. The rattling of the wheels over the rocky road was the only sound accompanying her own silence. There were no tears in her eyes, not because she didn't want to cry, but because something inside her had hardened the moment she heard her father speak those words in a merchant's tone. "The Prince Khalil Demir will grant land in exchange for your hand." As if she were nothing more than an extension of the ruined estate, just another field to be handed over to the authority of the empire. Her mother said nothing. She merely cupped her Dilara's face in her hands and blessed her, her trembling touch tasting like a final goodbye. Dilara held no resentment toward her. She knew her mother had no power over anything, not even her own fate. The palace came into view with the kind of majesty that only places built to intimidate can possess. Copper-domed roofs, polished stone columns, silent almond gardens and fountains that no longer sang. No ceremony awaited her. Two women dressed in gray gestured where she should leave her belongings. One of them brusquely pulled off her veil, as if to make it clear from the very start that even modesty no longer belonged to her here. "So this is the wife," a voice murmured behind her. Dilara slowly turned her head. In front of her stood a woman with a beauty that was almost unsettling, watching her with a half-smile that never reached her eyes. It was Julia, the prince's favorite, the one everyone expected would become his wife, the one now burning with jealousy beneath the scarlet silk of her tightly fitted tunic. "The prince doesn't usually choose this quickly," she added before walking away without waiting for an answer. Dilara said nothing. She had already learned that silence holds more dignity than humiliation. As she was led to her chambers, her thoughts could not leave the face of the man who, by nightfall, was supposed to become her husband. She had never seen him. She knew he was still young, 35, a man who had served the Sultan in military campaigns and who now governed Karaman with a firm hand. But she didn't know if he was cruel. She didn't know if he was just another man who takes without ever looking into the eyes of what is being offered. On the other side of the palace, Prince Khalil Demir stood on his balcony watching the young woman's arrival. Her figure stepping out of the carriage seemed almost made of smoke, slender and upright, without the slightest trace of hesitation. He recognized her instantly by the way she held her head as she looked out into the courtyard. The proud posture of someone who had lost everything except her dignity. He hadn't asked for her. He hadn't wanted this. But the Council of Elders had pressured him to forge an alliance with the region's notable families. Dilara's father, weakened by drought and death, had offered his daughter in exchange for release on imperial farmland, along with the promise of loyalty. Halil accepted, not out of interest, but to prevent a rural uprising from setting the province on fire. He did it out of duty, like so many other things he'd done since being stationed here. He was not a man of public passions. He had loved once and vowed never to make that mistake again. That's why when he was told the girl had arrived at the palace, he ordered no preparations, no music, no wedding feast. Instead, he walked to his chambers with a steady pace, but without haste, like a man facing a difficult night, determined to keep his head held high. Dilara sat in front of a mirror, her hair still braided the way it had been in her home. She wore a simple silk antari and a shade of deep blue, free of any embellishments. Her bare feet pressed against the thick knotted carpet. She did not rise when he entered. She merely turned her face slowly, looking at him with a mixture of apprehension and defiance. Halil stopped just a step away from her. He was not a man prone to hesitation, but that night, the words came to him more slowly. "I have not come to carry out the duty that neither of us chose. I know this union was not your choice. It wasn't mine either, and for that reason, this will be your room, your refuge. No one will enter without your permission, not even me." She did not respond immediately. She studied him for a long moment, searching his eyes for a lie, but there was none, only exhaustion, and something else, something that hurt to look at. "And what do they expect of me?" she asked finally, her voice carefully controlled. "That you stay here, that you fulfill your role, but I do not want an obedient wife, nor a woman who fears me. If you choose one day to share more than these walls, it will be because you choose it." Silence stretched between them like a taut silk thread. Then, with a slight nod, he turned and walked out, without looking back. That night, Dilara remained awake, not because of fear, not even because of anger, but because for the first time confusion outweighed the pain.
Dawn arrived without permission over the walls of the Karaman Palace. The sky was still painted a pale grey when the first sounds of the harem began to slowly stir the corridors. The gentle murmur of water flowing in the fountains, the soft creaking of servants' footsteps, the distant call to prayer. But in the northern wing, where the newly arrived bride slept, silence clung to the walls like a heavy veil. Dilara opened her eyes, having slept only in scattered fragments. It wasn't the softness of the bed or the scent of the embroidered cushions that kept her awake. It was uncertainty, that unsettling calm left behind by Prince Halil Demir's measured words the night before. She had expected coldness, imposition, even humiliation. But what she found was distance. A distance she couldn't tell if it was respect or punishment. The room was spacious and exquisite. A mauve silk entari hung neatly on a wooden screen, and on the low table rested a tray of fresh fruit, date bread, and a bowl of honey. Everything was arranged with care, almost ceremonially. But none of it felt like it belonged to her. This wealth was a gilded cage, and she had no intention of decorating it with compliance. A woman with sharp features and a dark tunic entered without knocking. She walked with purpose but made no sound. Her hands were large, her fingers rough but clean, and her nails neatly trimmed. Her gaze wasn't cruel, but it was impenetrable. "I am Nuran Kalfa," she said, without bowing her head or offering a smile. "I've been assigned to serve you. That doesn't mean I'm here to please you." Dilara didn't reply. She simply stood with dignity, smoothed the sleeves of her cotton robe, and fixed her eyes on the window where a timid ray of sunlight was beginning to slip between the curtains. Nuran remained still, quietly assessing her. "Some believe a wife without a shared bed is nothing but a guest," she said, with a neutral tone. "I'm not here to judge that. But you should know everything you do or don't do will be watched and talked about." "By you?" Dilara asked without turning. "By everyone. This palace speaks, even when no one opens their mouth." That was the beginning of a heavy routine. Every morning, Nuran led her to the bathhouse, offering her new garments, silk antaris, embroidered veils, fine leather sandals, and every time Dilara refused them. She chose the simplest clothing,
neutral colors, the sobriety of someone who does not wish to be seen. She ate in her room, in silence, barely tasting the food. She never attended the harem gatherings, she didn't return the greetings of the other women, and she never asked for the prince. It didn't take long before she became a whisper in the corridors. Her name was spoken with a mixture of mockery and fear. Some called her the wife without a crown, others the new shadow. But no one spoke louder than Hulya. From her privileged corner of the harem, Hulya released her poison-laced words with a sickly sweetness. She said the prince had only accepted this marriage out of obligation, that Dilara was nothing but a peasant in disguise, just another coin traded in the province's negotiations, that her silence was indignity but ignorance, and that soon she'd be sent back to where she belonged. The servants, eager not to lose Hulya's favor, repeated her words with nervous giggles. Some avoided Dilara's gaze when passing by, others ignored her entirely. But Nuran noticed everything, and though she said nothing, she began to sense something she didn't yet know how to name: resistance. Because Dilara did not cry. She did not beg, she did not plead, she held her head high, spoke softly and walked firmly. Every refusal was a shield, every silence a declaration. From the far side of the palace, Halil watched her, not obsessively, but with a kind of quiet attention that few noticed. Sometimes, from his window overlooking the gardens, he would watch her walking alone among the orange trees, hands clasped behind her back, or sitting by the reflecting pool, never touching the water, just staring at the mirrored sky as if searching for answers there. He never called for her, never sent messengers or gifts, but he didn't avoid her either. His presence was like a shadow around her, close but never reaching. One night, as Dilara was preparing for bed, Nuran placed a small carved wooden box on the table. Inside, there was a silver brooch inlaid with mother-of-pearl, simple yet beautiful. There was no note, no name. "Who sent this?" Dilara asked, not touching it. "I don't know," she replied, without lifting her gaze. "But no one gives something like this without reason." Dilara gently closed the box and set it aside. "Then let it stay there. I don't accept gifts from men who don't speak." For the first time, Nuran's stern expression seemed to crack, just slightly, a faint fracture across the usual hardness. Not all silences are cowardice. Dilara didn't answer. She lay down without another word, but that night, sleep did not come easily, because for the first time, she wondered if that distant man, that prince with dark eyes, was truly as indifferent as he appeared. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the harem grew heavier. Hulya could not bear the fact that despite her isolation, Dilara did not break. Her gossip turned even more vicious. She said the prince avoided Dilara's bed because he found her undesirable, that soon she'd be sent away, that someone else would take her place. One afternoon, Dilara found withered petals scattered on her bed. No one saw them being placed there, no one came to collect them, but the message was clear, a reminder that in this place flowers that don't bloom are ripped out. She didn't cry. She picked up the petals one by one and dropped them into a water jug. She watched them float. Then, without looking at Nuran, she whispered, "I'd rather wither standing than bloom on my knees." That night, when Nuran closed the door, she did it more softly than usual. In the wing of silence, where no one laughed, where echoes spoke louder than voices, a young woman began to rebuild herself, without help, without promises, without tenderness, only with the weight of her own pride and the growing mystery of a man who, without ever touching her, had begun to inhabit her thoughts.
The Karaman wind blew fiercely that afternoon, stirring up whirlwinds of dust and dry leaves in the palace courtyards. Autumn had begun to stain the trees with shades of ochre and crimson, and silence crept through the corridors like an uninvited guest. In the harem wing, the days passed with a heavy, suffocating slowness, and Dilara's name continued to float like an echo, never spoken aloud, but heard by everyone. After several days locked within her own shadows, Dilara began to discreetly explore other parts of the palace. Her steps were cautious, never meant to draw attention, but her eyes absorbed every detail with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. On one of those silent walks, she discovered a carved wooden door, slightly ajar, from which drifted a faint scent of old papyrus, dried ink, and secrets. It was the library. The room was spacious and vaulted, with bookshelves that climbed to the ceiling like the columns of some forgotten temple. Soft light filtered through high lattice windows, casting intricate patterns onto the carpets. No servants, no whispers, only the quiet company of books, and a pair of low-backed chairs, one of which still held a neatly folded blanket. Nuran found her there at sunset, a book in her hands, her eyes fixed on a page she wasn't reading. "I didn't know you could read Arabic," Nuran remarked from the doorway, her voice rough but calm. "My mother taught me, before my father forbade it," Dilara replied without looking up. "Nothing is forbidden here, as long as it isn't spoken aloud." From that moment on, the library became her refuge. In that place, free from judgment and pointing fingers, she found a peace she hadn't known in years. She read Sufi poetry, ancient chronicles of the empire, treatises on inheritance and nobility. But it was deep in one of the shelves that she found a small chest covered with a linen cloth. Inside were letters, some unsigned, others sealed with official stamps, all written in elegant calligraphy, black ink framed by delicate golden borders. With trembling hands, she began to read. One letter, from a high-ranking imperial official, warned of the dangerous and sentimental attitude during the Kayseri campaign, and recommended his dismissal or discreet exile to a secondary province. Another letter, far more personal, seemed to have been written by Halil himself. It had no recipient. It was a confession, an outpouring of helplessness in the face of an unjust order to burn an entire village in retaliation for an attack that had occurred elsewhere. Halil had refused. He defied the command. He refused to stain his sword with innocent blood. The court condemned him in silence. They didn't strip him of his title, but they sent him far away to govern Karaman, a punishment disguised as duty. Dilara set the letter down on the table as if it were burning her hands. Her breathing quickened. She didn't know what shook her more, the cruelty of the order or the choice of the man everyone described as cold and impenetrable. A man who had saved many and carried the weight of compassion like a secret curse. That night, as she ate alone in her room, something inside her loosened, like a knot that could no longer hold. Her gaze drifted toward the silver brooch still sitting untouched on the table. For the first time, she reached for it. On the other side of the palace, Halil stood before the provincial map. His advisors spoke of trade routes, failed crops, and new taxes. He nodded, he listened, but his mind never left the image of Dilara sitting by the reflecting pool, her hands clasped behind her back. He wanted to approach her, to tell her that he understood, but his own past reminded him what happens to men who reveal their hearts in a world built of steel and power. That same night, as the palace lamps began to dim one by one, Julia prowled the corridors, her velvet veil masking a cold fury. From the shadows, she had watched Dilara, watched her do the unthinkable, refuse to play the game. She hadn't tried to please anyone, hadn't sought the prince's favor, hadn't built alliances in the harem, and yet her silence was starting to disturb everything. With a twisted smile, Julia coaxed Aziza, a young, timid servant, into her plan. "Just a few drops of bitter infusion," she said sweetly. "Nothing serious, just enough for her to understand that silence has consequences here." The tea was served at midday. Dilara drank it without noticing the faint metallic taste. Minutes passed. First, a strange heat bloomed in her chest, then dizziness. Then the walls began to spin. She tried to stand. Her legs gave out. She collapsed to her knees beside the divan, struggling for breath. Nuran was the first to find her. She saw Dilara on the floor, pale, her pulse weak, and didn't waste time calling for help. She went straight to the prince's chambers. Halil listened without moving, but his eyes ignited like fire. He walked the corridors with a firm, relentless stride, ignoring the servants scrambling out of his way. Breaking every protocol without a word, he entered Dilara's room and knelt beside her. "What happened?" he demanded, looking up at Nuran. "The tea. I suspect something was added, but I can't prove it. Not yet." Without hesitation, Halil lifted Dilara into his arms, her body light as a sigh. He carried her to his private chambers and ordered cold cloths to be prepared. He summoned the palace physician. For hours, he sat by her side, watching her labored breathing. He didn't touch her forehead. He didn't speak. He simply watched, as if the answers to questions he had buried for years were written somewhere on her sleeping lips. When she finally opened her eyes, Dilara didn't know where she was. The curtains were different, the lamps higher. And the man beside her, that man with the intense gaze and steady hands, was the same one who had offered her freedom on the night the world expected possession. "What are you doing here?" she whispered, still weak. Halil didn't answer right away. He looked at her, like a man gathering the courage to speak a truth that might shatter something. Sometimes, protecting someone means crossing lines. She wanted to reply, but sleep pulled her back into its arms. And that night, for the first time since her arrival, the northern wing of the palace stayed lit until dawn. Because when destiny begins to unravel its threads, not even the heaviest silence can stop the truth from finding its way.
The rain had stopped that morning, leaving the air thick with the scent of damp earth and wet leaves. The sky over Karaman opened timidly between pale clouds, and the palace gardens, still quiet, exhaled the fragrance of orange blossoms. Autumn marched on, steady and relentless, and with it Dilara's days grew heavier, deeper, as if each sunrise weighed a little more on her back. It had been a week since she collapsed, a week of recovery, of unanswered questions, and of silences far louder than any scream. No one spoke of what had happened, but the shift in the air was undeniable. Servants lowered their eyes when passing her. Nuran was more present, more watchful. And Khalil? Khalil hadn't entered her room again, and yet she knew he had been there. The blankets had been arranged with care. The flowers in the vase were fresh each morning, and the silver brooch, the one she had never truly accepted, appeared one day beside her pillow, wrapped in a white linen cloth. Dilara asked nothing. She simply waited until her legs could hold her steady again. And when she finally walked the palace corridors, her steps were calm, but her heart beat with a restrained agitation. She wasn't seeking confrontation, but she needed answers. It was Nuran who, without a word, showed her where to find him. The sun was beginning to set when Dilara crossed the inner gardens toward the marble fountain that separated the harem wing from the governor's gallery. There, under the shadow of an orange tree, still heavy with late blossoms, stood Khalil Demir, hands clasped behind his back, his gaze lifted toward the sky. He wore no cloak, only a long, dark linen tunic and a vest embroidered with faded gold thread. His silhouette was etched against the glow of dusk, like a silent statue. Dilara stopped a few steps away. She didn't bow, she didn't lower her gaze. "Were you the one who ordered me to be brought here?" He turned his head slowly. He didn't seem surprised by the question. "No." "But you accepted the deal. You knew I was being offered as part of a negotiation, and you didn't say no." Khalil didn't deny it. "It was the Council of Elders who brought the proposal. I didn't want to publicly humiliate your father. I accepted it as a political duty." Dilara pressed her lips together. Rage burned in her throat, but she held it back. "So I was, what, a convenient burden?" "You were a price," he replied, with a brutal honesty that stung. "A price I chose to pay to prevent an uprising. I'm not proud of it, but I won't deny it." She looked away just for a moment. The fountain beside them murmured softly, as if trying to fill the silence with sweeter words. But she wasn't looking for comfort, only truth. "Since you arrived, you haven't touched me. You haven't forced anything. Is it because you despise me or pity me?" Khalil looked at her, and for a brief moment something softened in his dark eyes. "It's out of respect, and because I don't want anyone beside me who looks at me with fear." Dilara studied him closely. He was not a man of many words, but each one seemed weighed, measured deep within his soul before leaving his lips. "And what do you see when you look at me?" she asked, her voice quieter now. He lowered his gaze, took a step closer, slow, deliberate, but without invading her space. "I see a woman who doesn't bend, and here, that's worth more than any title." A chill ran down Dilara's spine. It wasn't the cold. It was the way he said it, the way his words didn't come to convince her, but to acknowledge her. The wind grew cooler, the sunset light turned golden, and petals from the orange blossoms began to fall like silent snow. Khalil took the long coat folded over his arm and extended it toward her. Dilara accepted it without a word. Their fingers brushed, only for a second, but it was enough to send a tremor through her chest. Khalil stepped away and sat on one of the stone benches. She hesitated, but followed, sitting beside him, leaving a respectful space between them. Neither spoke for several minutes. Only the murmur of water, the scent of flowers, and the distant sound of the guards changing shifts filled the air. "I've read your letters," Dilara said at last. Khalil turned toward her, tense. "They weren't sealed, but they weren't meant for me." He didn't respond. The silence that followed was heavy, but not hostile. "I don't understand why you did it. Refusing to follow an imperial order, you knew it would cost you everything." Khalil narrowed his eyes, as if the memory still hurt. "I saw children in that village. I saw old women trembling, not even knowing why they were about to die. I couldn't do it. I'm not a martyr. I'm not a hero. I'm just a man who couldn't stomach injustice." Dilara lowered her gaze. Something about this man shattered all her assumptions. He wasn't what she had expected to find. Not a tyrant, not an absent husband. He was a man hiding his own wounds beneath layers of control. "I'm not used to men who respect silence," she admitted. "And I'm not used to women who survive without bowing." Their eyes met in the middle of that unspoken confession, just for a second. But in that second, something broke and something was born. It wasn't desire. It wasn't tenderness. It was recognition, as if for the first time they were seeing each other truly, stripped of duty, stripped of expectations. Night descended slowly. The garden lamps flickered on, one by one, casting long, warm shadows. Dilara pulled the coat tighter around her. The scent of the fabric brought something she couldn't quite name. It wasn't perfume. It was presence. It was Khalil. "Will you lock yourself away again?" he asked softly. "I won't pretend this is what I dreamed of. I know. I just need to know if someday I'll be able to trust. Only you can answer that." And in that moment, she understood something. For the first time, she wasn't being pursued. She wasn't being watched. She was being waited for. And in that waiting, perhaps the beginning of something unnamed was quietly learning how to breathe beneath the stars in the night of the garden.
The first rains of November fell over Karaman with the softness of an omen. The sky, heavy with thick clouds, cast a veil of humidity over the palace, making the scents of the garden richer and the silences in the corridors even deeper. Inside the harem, the days carried on, filled with embroidery, soft music, and whispers hidden behind silk fans. But in Dilara's soul, something had begun to stir, slowly, like stagnant water rippling just before it breaks its stillness. She had begun to breathe differently, to walk with firmer steps, to hold the gaze of the other women without fearing their judgment. Nuran noticed. She no longer followed Dilara closely as before, but watched her gestures, her decisions, her silences, like a mother who does not protect but does not abandon either. One morning, as Dilara wandered alone through the gardens in the west wing, a servant approached her in hurried steps. "Visitors have arrived. The prince asked not to be disturbed, but there is a man who insists." Dilara needed no further explanation. Her chest tightened with a bitter intuition. She climbed the marble steps, her heart pounding, crossed the vestibule without asking permission, and when she reached the small audience hall,
She saw him, her father, dressed in modest elegance, the way someone tries to cling to a lost dignity. His beard was grayer, his eyes more sunken, but his voice still carried that commanding tone, the tone he used when he didn't come to discuss, but to impose. "Daughter," he said, stretching out a hand with false cordiality, "at last I get to see you." She didn't move. "What are you doing here?" "I've come to speak with the governor. I have a proposal that will surely interest him." Dilara frowned. The air grew heavier around her. "What kind of proposal?" "It's a matter between men," he snapped, turning his face away in annoyance. "You shouldn't involve yourself." But it was too late. Halil had entered the room silently, accompanied by 2 advisors. Seeing Dilara standing before her father, he paused, observing the scene with the unshakable calm of a man who has learned to read gestures before words. "I can listen, but if this involves family business, I prefer my wife stays." Dilara's father stiffened. He cleared his throat, gripped the hat he carried under his arm, and spoke with a hollow smile. "Your Excellency, as you know, I have another daughter, younger, more docile, less troublesome. I've been thinking she could be of use in your household, as a servant perhaps. In return, if you deem it fair, you might grant me usufruct of the lands in Yilmaz Dere, those that have yet to be cultivated." Silence fell, thick and suffocating. Dilara felt the world collapse against her chest. Her sister, her younger sister, being offered as if she were just another sheep from the flock, as she had been, as so many had been. She stepped forward, fists clenched, her voice cracked with fury. "Was it not enough? Was it not enough to sell me like a barren plot of land? Now you come to offer another, as if daughters were seeds to be traded for favors?" Her father raised his chin, defiant. "You have your place in this palace. You have privileges. You lack nothing." "Nothing," she echoed, bitterness thick in her voice. "Nothing. Nothing except the respect of the one who was supposed to protect me." Halil stepped forward. His gaze was a shadow, dark and heavy, cast over the visitor's face. "Mr. Yilmaz," he said, his tone steady, contained, "this palace does not do business with men who do not know the value of dignity. No land, no favors, and no women will ever be traded in my presence." Dilara's father turned pale. "I was only trying—" "Leave," Halil cut him off, "and do not return." The man opened his mouth, but there was no reply. In that moment, he understood there was nothing left to gain. He left the room without saying goodbye, his face flushed, his hurried steps betraying that he had lost more than just an opportunity. Dilara stood frozen in silence. Halil looked at her, but not with pity, not with comfort, with respect. A silent recognition, as soft as a touch, as heavy as a promise. That afternoon, the palace halls felt wider, emptier. Dilara walked them like someone who had just crossed an invisible threshold. But peace was brief. In the east wing, Julia waited, lounging among velvet cushions. She wore a tight red entare, her hair loose over her shoulders, a string of fake pearls catching the light of dusk. She had heard the whispers. She knew that Dilara's father had been expelled, and she understood. Her chance was slipping away. She was not ready to accept it. That night, as the prince walked toward his study, Julia crossed his path. She feigned clumsiness, letting a handkerchief fall to the floor. She bent to pick it up, slowly, and as she rose, she stepped closer than she should have. "My prince, there are some nights that should never be spent alone," she purred, her voice honeyed. Halil didn't respond. He tried to walk past her, but she stepped into her way, and then, without warning, she kissed him. It wasn't sweet, it wasn't tender, it was an invasion, a desperate act. What neither of them saw was the figure standing at the end of the corridor. Dilara, a shawl wrapped over her shoulders, her step slow, walking only to think. She saw them. She saw Julia's gesture. She saw the prince, standing still. She didn't say a word. She simply turned, walked back to her chambers, closed the door softly, and sat by the window, breathing. That night, she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply sat, watching the clouded sky as the rain began to fall once more over the rooftops of Karaman. Nuran entered without knocking. She stood still for a moment, then quietly sat across from Dilara, like someone who knows how to accompany without asking anything. "My sister," Dilara said hoarsely. "My younger sister has been sent to a monastery in the hills. My father hid her away to avoid the scandal. I couldn't do anything. I didn't protect her." Nuran met her gaze, steady but not unkind. Sometimes protecting doesn't mean stopping things from happening. It means learning to live with the memory of what you couldn't prevent. Dilara nodded, slowly. But deep in her soul, that night, a fracture opened. A fracture that had no name, but one that had already begun to change everything.
The days began to stretch without warning, as if time itself refused to move forward, in the absence of the one who had given order to the silence. Halil left on a gray morning, no ceremony, no promises, just 6 horsemen escorting him and the heavy weight of state affairs on his shoulders. He was tasked with inspecting the borders, settling territorial disputes, and overseeing tax collection. It was a duty he could not refuse as the governor of Karaman, and no one dared question it. But his absence left a void that was felt almost immediately. Dilara found out from a maid who, without any ill intent, casually mentioned that the prince wouldn't return until after the lunar market. The corridor of the north wing, where he often passed, grew colder. The warm glow of his chambers, once lit deep into the night, disappeared for days. And with his departure, the palace seemed to revert to its oldest language, the language of subtle poison, of eyes that follow without ever looking, of rumors that slither beneath the carpets. The harem, which had held a tense calm since Dilara's arrival, began to stir. Some women who once ignored her out of respect or fear now dared to look her straight in the eye, mocking, brazen. The younger ones repeated phrases they didn't fully understand but knew were designed to hurt. A wife without a kiss is just an expensive piece of furniture. The prince prefers women who don't look like statues. A flower that never blooms wilts sooner. Julia, though more distant since her disgrace, still held sway over the servants. She masked her bitterness with soft gestures, offered sweets, gave advice, and in between slipped words as sharp as needles, wrapped in honey. Poor Lady Dilara. She locks herself away so much. Maybe she still doesn't know how to please a man. The poor prince, married only in name. And so, without raising her voice, she let her resentment seep into every corner of the palace and beyond. The whispers reached the merchants in the market, the palace guards, the wives of local judges. Soon it was said in the back alleys of Karaman that the prince had a wife who was mute, cold, and purely decorative, forced upon him by duty, not chosen by love, that she had never shared his table, his bed, not even a fleeting touch. Dilara didn't respond, didn't ask, but she heard. The weight of solitude settled on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. Her room became her refuge and her prison. She spent hours seated by the window, watching the branches of the orange tree sway in the wind, imagining that life beyond those walls might have been different if she had been born a man, if she had been born free. Nuran Kulfa, once reserved and distant, began to change. She would find Dilara in the afternoons and simply sit beside her in silence, sometimes offering a bowl of warm milk, sometimes a hand-stitched handkerchief, sometimes just her quiet presence. One evening, when the sky was painted in shades of purple, Dilara wandered to the pond in the inner garden. The water reflected the moon with a stillness that felt almost fake. Nuran followed her without a word, sitting beside her, hands resting gently on her knees. Finally, she said, "You're not like the others." Dilara slowly turned her head, her eyes carrying no surprise, only a silent question. "I came to this palace through the wrong door too," Nuran continued. "I was 17. My uncle sold me after my mother died. Here I learned to walk without making a sound, to eat without tasting, to breathe without bothering anyone." Dilara didn't speak, but something in her face trembled, a tiny crack forming from deep within. "At 20, I gave birth to a daughter. The prince back then, the sultan's cousin, allowed me to keep her. She was beautiful. Her name was Layla. But she got sick and died before she turned 6. After that, I never touched another man. I stayed here, watching, taking care of others like me, women who arrived without wanting to." Dilara lowered her gaze. The water reflected her face, paler than she recognized. Why do you take care of me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Nuran breathed deeply. "Because when I look at you, I see her. Because your silence feels like hers. And because I don't want to watch you wither before your time." Neither said another word. They remained there side by side until the cold forced them back inside. But something shifted between them that night. They were no longer mistress and servant. They were two women bound by loss, by injustice, by the echo of things that could never be reclaimed. The days that followed passed with the heavy stillness that always comes before a storm. Dilara avoided the common rooms of the harem. She preferred the lonely corridors, the forgotten books in the library, the quiet patios where no cruel whispers could reach her. But she knew the poison had already been spilled. Her name floated on the tongues of people who had never truly seen her. And whatever Khalil thought upon his return would depend on what he had heard. And Khalil did return. One afternoon, just as the sun began to slip behind the mountains, the caravan rode in. The prince dismounted, covered in dust and silence. He asked for no rest, refused banquets. Only one question passed his lips. "Is everything in order?" Then he locked himself in his chambers, seeing no one. It was Nuran who told him that Dilara was well, that she had not caused any trouble, that she had not stepped foot outside the palace. But she said nothing more. 2 days passed before Khalil sought her out, and when he did, it wasn't with sweet words or empty promises. It was with the steady voice of a man in need of the truth. He found her sitting on a stone bench in the winter garden corridor, a closed book resting on her lap. "I've heard things," he said, without preamble. "In the market, in the square, even within my own walls." Dilara met his gaze, calm, unafraid now. "I've heard things too," she replied, "that I have a mouth that doesn't know how to smile, that I'm a vase without flowers, that you don't look at me because you don't desire me." Halil narrowed his eyes, not out of anger, but because it hurt. "And you? What do you believe?" "I believe silence can kill too. That contempt doesn't always come with shouting. Sometimes it comes with distance." He stepped closer, but she rose. Her face was steady, like an ancient wall. There was no anger there, but there was a boundary. "I don't need you to defend me," she said. "I just need to know if you'll ever truly see me, not as your wife, but as a person." And without waiting for an answer, she walked away. Halil stood there, his heart pounding, as if something inside him had just shattered quietly. The absence he left behind was nothing compared to the one he felt now, watching her leave with straight shoulders and a wounded soul. Because sometimes silence isn't enough to protect, and love left unspoken is love that gets lost.
Night fell over Karaman with a slowness that seemed to press down on the palace rooftops. One by one the lamps flickered to life, and the shadows stretched through the hallways with the stealth of someone guarding secrets. In the harem, voices were softer than usual. Something hung in the air, something without a name but felt on the skin like a silent warning. Dilara had received the letter that morning, tucked between the pages of a book someone had left on her bed. The parchment was small, precisely folded. No signature, no seal, no scent of perfume. Only a firm, hurried handwriting that read, "Protect the prince. Someone wants to bring him down with poison." At first, she thought it was a cruel joke, yet another attempt to humiliate her, to weaken her. But something about the handwriting, about the unsettling silence of that message, gnawed at her. It didn't say much, but it said enough. She spent the day in silence, walked through the gardens, visited the library, pretended to be calm, but the questions wouldn't stop echoing inside her. Was it true? Another one of Hulya's schemes? Or just a trap meant to make her stumble again? By sunset, she crossed the eastern wing, heading to Halil's quarters. She went alone. Her heart pounded beneath the lavender intari she had chosen that day. Stopping at the door to his study, she requested a private audience. The guard hesitated, but seeing her resolve, bowed and went to announce her. Halil appeared moments later, wearing a simple gray linen robe. His face was tense from the burdens of recent days. The moment his eyes met hers, something flickered between surprise and an emotion he didn't dare to reveal. "I need to tell you something," she said quietly. "Something that may not be true, but if it is, you need to know." She handed him the letter. Halil took it slowly, reading it without so much as a blink. His expression didn't change, but his breath deepened. He folded the parchment carefully and slipped it into the sleeve of his robe. "Did someone give this to you?" "I don't know. I just found it among my things. I didn't see anyone, but I know who it's about." She didn't say the name. She didn't have to. Halil nodded. "Thank you for telling me."
She hesitated, as if about to say more, but held back. He studied her for another moment before stepping back. "Tonight there will be a dinner with some members of the council. I think you should be there." Dilara said nothing, but her gaze, steady, calm, was answer enough. That evening, the main hall was prepared with all the care of a ceremonial gathering. Golden chandeliers cast a warm glow on the walls, fresh carpets lined the floors, and the servants moved with precise, rehearsed grace. The guests were few, all from Halil's inner circle, a provincial judge, an elderly scholar, and 3 council members. A handful of women from the harem had also been invited, lending an air of normalcy to the evening. Among them, Hulya. She wore a deep purple silken tari with silver embroidery. Her hair was elegantly styled, her lips curved into a polite smile that never reached her eyes. She sat close enough to Halil to be noticed, but not close enough to be obvious. Dilara arrived a few minutes later. Her dress was modest, yet her presence seemed to command the room. She walked with measured grace, avoiding everyone's gaze, and took a seat at the far end of the table, discreet but visible. Nuran hovered nearby, watchful as always. The dinner proceeded as expected. Traditional dishes were served: spiced lamb, almond rice, stuffed eggplants, and honey pastries. The conversation meandered through safe topics: the harvest, the approaching winter, and an upcoming visit from one of the Sultan's envoys. But Halil barely spoke. His eyes scanned the table with a quiet vigilance, tracking every glance, every movement. When dessert arrived, pistachio sweets soaked in rosewater, he gave a subtle signal. A servant approached, carrying a tray of tea. Its aroma was rich, inviting, warm. She poured a cup for each guest. The last one was set before Hulya. Hulya picked it up delicately, bringing it close to her lips, but before she could drink, Halil's voice broke the air. "Won't you make a toast for the peace of this palace?" Hulya blinked, caught off guard. "Of course," she replied, raising the cup. "To harmony among us." And just as the cups neared lips, Halil lifted his hand. No one drank. "Why don't you take the first sip?" A silence thick enough to slice through the room settled. Hulya slowly lowered her cup, feigning confusion. "Are you doubting me?" Halil said nothing. He just stared. The kind of stare that slices through masks. Hulya's complexion drained of color. "I don't understand." "Don't you?" Dilara's voice rose for the first time, soft but sharp. "Because I do. I understand what it feels like to fear the water you drink, to live in a home where trust doesn't exist." Hulya stood up from her seat, tea spilling from the cup. "This is an outrage." Halil stood up as well. His voice was low, but the authority in it filled the room. "This palace has been poisoned for far too long, not just with substances, but with words. And you, Hulya, you filled these walls with both."
Hulya opened her mouth to protest, but a guard approached, silently, unmistakably. "As of tonight," Halil continued, "you are to be sent to the convent in Afyon. Your tongue will harm no one there." Hulya stared at him, her face twisted in rage and humiliation. Without another word, she spun around and stormed out. The silence left behind was suffocating.
Slowly, the guests began to leave, understanding the evening was over. Dilara rose without looking at Khalil. She walked calmly toward her quarters. Nuran followed at a distance, but before entering, Dilara paused. "Are you all right?" she asked without turning. "As all right as someone who's lost. Again," Nuran replied. Dilara frowned. "Lost what?" Nuran hesitated, then whispered without meeting her gaze, "Sometimes, writing without a signature is the only way to protect someone you love without being seen." And she walked away. That night, Dilara didn't close her door. She left it slightly ajar, not as an invitation, but as a choice. After the bells struck midnight, Khalil stepped inside. He wore a deep navy robe. His face showed no signs of fatigue, but held something else, an emotion too fragile, too dangerous to name. He said a few words about how, "I didn't come here as a prince. I came as a man," he said softly. Dilara sat on the divan, her gaze steady, though her hands trembled slightly. "I don't need your gratitude," she said before he could speak. "I only did what was right." "And you did it knowing it might be a trap. That speaks more about who you are than any words ever could." He stepped closer, took her hand, leaned in to kiss it, but she gently pulled it away, not out of rejection, not out of coldness, but because it still hurt. Khalil nodded, understanding. He said nothing more, simply turned and walked out, leaving behind the faint scent of midnight incense, and a promise unspoken, a promise still alive, beating in the hearts of them both. Because the judgment of the heart is never declared aloud. It reveals itself slowly in the silence they share. The walls of Karaman glowed under the soft light of countless lanterns as the palace prepared to receive regional authorities and an envoy sent from Istanbul. The official state banquet was far more than a simple reception. It was a political statement, a display of order, refinement, and loyalty to the Sultan. The marble floors had been polished until they gleamed, the fountains adorned with jasmine petals, and the central courtyard bathed in the golden glow of oil lamps, spilling light across the velvet darkness of the night. Servants hurried back and forth with measured urgency. Some polished silver trays, others adjusted the placement of cushions. From the kitchens drifted the rich aroma of spiced lamb, mingled with the sweetness of freshly baked baklava. But inside one of the harem's chambers, the air was different. Dilara stood before the full-length mirror. Her silhouette, wrapped in an emerald antari, seemed to float above the carpet. The fabric, soft as the breath of a newly bloomed rose, was embroidered with golden threads, tracing delicate patterns of leaves and stars. The high neckline and cinched waist shaped her figure with regal elegance. Nuran Kalfa fastened the last of the clasps, and then, with practiced hands, gathered Dilara's hair into a low bun, the style worn by royal wives. No veil covered her face. No shadow clouded her gaze. "Are you sure about this?" Nuran asked softly. "I'm tired of hiding. I wasn't born into this life to pretend I don't exist. Tonight, I am the governor's wife. Let everyone see it." Nuran nodded, bowed lightly, and quietly stepped away. Dilara walked through the palace corridors with steady steps. Every servant she passed paused, even if just for a moment. It wasn't common to see her like this, so visible, so self-assured. Women of the harem whispered behind pillars. Some guards averted their gaze out of respect, or perhaps confusion. When she stepped into the main courtyard, every conversation seemed to falter. The music continued, the string instruments filling the air with melodies of surna and kanun, but the human voices faded into a hush of stunned silence. The emerald antari shimmered beneath the lamps like a living jewel. Dilara walked forward, eyes neither lowered nor searching for approval. There was no arrogance in her posture, only a dignity that could not be denied. From the grand staircase, Khalil saw her. He stood among officers, advisors, and the Sultan's envoy. He wore a black kaftan embroidered with crimson threads, secured by a braided silk belt. His face remained stoic, unreadable, but his eyes followed her from the first step she took until she positioned herself among the guests near the north wing. Dilara didn't look for him. She didn't have to. She knew he was watching. She felt it. She breathed it. The envoy from the Sultan, a slender man with a perfectly trimmed mustache and a sharp, calculating gaze, approached Khalil shortly afterward. "The Sultan is pleased with your work in Karaman, Your Highness. He believes your duties here are complete. He wishes to have you closer, in the province of Izmit. It's a place of passage, but of strategic importance, only 2 days from Istanbul." Khalil remained silent. "It's a promotion," the envoy added smoothly, "and a sign of trust." "And what does the Sultan expect of me in Izmit?" Khalil asked, his tone unchanged. "Your presence and your obedience." At that moment, the music swelled, as if even the instruments sensed the tension in the air. Khalil gave a slight nod, but said nothing. Dilara, standing near a group of noblewomen, had heard every word, not because she was eavesdropping, but because no one imagined the silent wife had learned how to move through the shadows unnoticed. The night carried on with dancing, toasts, and hollow compliments. Dilara stayed where she was, receiving looks of confusion, envy, and restrained admiration. Some women approached with carefully measured words. Others simply stared, as if she were a foreign piece on the chessboard. She responded with polite grace, but inside her heart trembled, not from fear, but from the terrifying realization she might lose something that was only now beginning to awaken within her. When the music finally faded and the lamps began to dim one by one, Dilara slipped into the garden. The dew hadn't yet fallen, but the breeze was crisp. She walked among the orange trees, remembering the night when Khalil had offered her his cloak. Her fingertips brushed against a damp leaf. She wasn't thinking of him with anger or desire. She was thinking of him with confusion and a kind of respect she didn't yet know how to tame. She didn't hear his footsteps, but she felt him arrive. Khalil emerged from the shadows, his face tired, his formal cloak and official insignias gone. Just a man, in the night, searching for answers. She didn't move, didn't lower her gaze. He stopped only a few steps away. "Why did you come tonight, like this?" he asked. "Because I'm done being invisible. If they're going to look at me, I want them to see me for who I truly am." Khalil nodded slowly. "Did you hear what the envoy told me?" "I did." "And what do you think?" "I think you deserve it, but it also means leaving behind the one place where you built something with justice." He stared at her, intensely, not in a way that hurt, but in a way that didn't ask for permission. "And you, Dilara, what do you want?" She drew a deep breath, then took one step closer. I want to stop being afraid of what I feel. For you. For me." Her words hung between them like invisible threads. Khalil extended his hand, not to touch her, but so she knew he was there. She didn't take it, but she didn't step away either. "I've made many mistakes," he said quietly, "but giving you your space was not one of them, and I won't cross a threshold you don't open." "Tonight," she whispered, "there is no threshold, only a garden and two people who are done pretending they don't see each other." The silence that followed was deeper than any conversation. There were no caresses, no kisses, only a shared moment where the masks fell. And without veils, without duty, without protocol, they saw each other, truly, as two souls shaped by solitude, by honor, and by a tenderness neither yet knew how to name. That night, the prince and the wife, once traded like a coin, met for the first time as equals. And though fate still held its storms, something shifted beneath those orange trees, something that could never be undone.
The skies over Karaman turned a shade of gray so heavy it seemed to have descended upon the earth itself. Since dawn, clouds had gathered with restrained fury, and by midday, the storm broke loose with a violence not seen in many winters. The wind tore roof tiles, bent trees, and shoved men against their own walls. The rain didn't fall, it spilled from the sky in desperation, flooding streets, fields, and hearts. From the council chamber, Halil stood over the carved wooden table, staring at the map spread before him. Reports arrived in rapid succession. The village of Güzelkür completely cut off, the wooden bridge at Karayaka washed away by the current, a dozen homes buried in mud near the eastern hills. With every new piece of news, his face grew harder. This was no time to wait for orders from the capital. He was the authority here, and it was his duty to act. Prepare the horses, send aid to the nearest villages, dry rations, blankets, firewood. Have the physicians head to the highlands. I'll take care of the valley myself, he commanded, fastening his thick, dark wool cloak. In the palace corridors, the echoes of his orders blended with the roar of rain hammering the stone. From her wing, Dilara listened to the commotion. She walked to a corridor window and saw the gardens completely submerged. She didn't ask herself whether she should help. She didn't wait for permission. She found Nuran and asked for a waterproof cloak, high boots, and a carriage to take her to the makeshift hospital by the old mosque. "Are you sure?" the older woman asked, by now too used to not arguing with her, but still shaken by what she saw. "That's where I belong," Dilara replied, fastening the collar of her traveling coat. "I refuse to be a shadow anymore." The medical caravan departed through the mud and chaos. Dilara rode in one of the last carriages, holding a basket filled with bandages, jars of ointment, and a will that remained unbroken. When they arrived, the mosque was crowded with women and children, shivering, some with open wounds, others with feet wrapped in torn cloth. The air smelled of mud, dampness, and despair. Without hesitation, she rolled up her sleeves of her modest entari and knelt beside a young girl with bruised cheeks and torn arms. "What's your name?" she asked softly, cleaning a wound. "Zeynep," she sobbed. "Don't cry, you're alive. That's what matters now. We are going to take care of you." And so, wound after wound, tear after tear, Dilara immersed herself in the harsh reality of a people barely surviving nature's wrath. There were no jewels here, no silk,
no perfumed halls to shield anyone from misery. But amid the chaos, she discovered a strength within herself she never knew existed. Hours later, Halil arrived at the same shelter, mud splattered up to his waist, his cloak soaked, boots sinking into the muck. When he stepped inside, his eyes searched for her. He found her crouched over a feverish boy, gently wiping his face with a damp cloth. There was no nobility in her clothes, no porcelain paleness painted on her cheeks, only devotion, determination, and tenderness. He didn't say a word, neither did she. For hours they worked side by side in silence. Halil directed the guards distributing food. Dilara made sure the women had a dry corner to rest in. From time to time their eyes met, brief, like sparks flickering amid the hail. Neither spoke of what was beginning to grow between them, uninvited, a respect built on actions, not promises. When night fell, the storm had yet to relent. It was as if the sky wept for something the world no longer remembered. Most of the wounded were asleep. Soldiers rested in shifts. The oil lamps trembled beneath the wooden beams of the old mosque. Halil approached her. "There's no one left to care for tonight. Go back to the palace." Dilara shook her head. "I can't. There aren't enough blankets. If anyone wakes up with a fever, I need to be here." Halil studied her tired face, her hands red and scraped from lye, mud, and endless bandages. And he felt a sharp pull in his chest, not pity, but admiration, quiet, steady, and sinking deeper like roots beneath the mud. Together, they stepped into the back courtyard of the mosque. The rain still hammered down, though no longer with the same rage. The air smelled of wounded earth, raw and cleansed. They found shelter beneath a stone awning, where the water cascaded in sheets before them like a silver curtain. Alone, entirely alone. Halil shrugged off his soaked cloak and draped it over her shoulders without a word. She did not protest. "Do you still fear me?" he asked, his voice a soft murmur against the pounding rain. Dilara turned her face toward him. Her eyes glistened, not from tears, but from the rain and the truth. "No, I don't fear you anymore, but I don't know if I can trust you." Halil nodded slowly. He wasn't offended. He didn't argue. "All I can promise you," he said, "is that I will never hurt you. My word will always be stronger than my title. And what I feel for you doesn't come from duty. It's something I don't even know how or when it started growing." The words floated between them, like a prayer with no temple. Then, without asking permission, Halil reached out and took her hand. No urgency, no possession, just the quiet warmth of honest, human touch. Her fingers didn't tremble, didn't pull away. They closed gently around his, like a flower quietly blooming in the rain. And under that stone awning, with the raindrops falling like bells made of water, there were no eternal promises, no grand declarations, only two weary hearts, finally touching without fear, without barriers, without lies. That night, when the rain finally ceased, the world was still broken, but they were not.
The days following the storm brought with them an unexpected calm, as if the sky itself, exhausted by its own fury, had granted the earth a truce. Karaman slowly awakened among dry mud, broken branches, and roads restored by the hands of men and women who expected no miracles, only respect. Halil supervised every reconstruction effort without escort, without ceremony, walking among the villagers with his cloak gathered, arms crossed, and eyes sharp. He was no longer just a prince sent by the court. He had become something more, a protector, a man who belonged to this land. Dilara, for her part, returned to the palace not as a silent figure, but as a living presence. The servants no longer avoided her steps, and Nuran Kalfa, though she never said it aloud, gave her more space to decide with each passing day. Even the younger women of the harem, once whispering and wary, now looked at her with a mixture of respect and fear, as if her voice, without ever having to rise, had reshaped the very order of things. One morning, as the sun began to rise over the red-tiled rooftops, Halil summoned the members of the provincial council. The messenger said it was urgent, but not a matter of war. All the notable men arrived promptly, some curious, others wrapped in their usual caution, still lingering from the visit of the Sultan's envoy. From the high balcony in the west wing, Dilara watched as the men entered the grand hall of columns. She wore an ivory antari, simple yet elegant, embroidered with delicate jasmine motifs that only revealed themselves in the morning light. Her hair was pinned up with tiny pearls, and although her hands held an unopened letter, her thoughts weren't on the sealed words, but on the moment she knew was about to unfold. Halil stood alone at the far end of the room. No guards, no banners, just him, the echo of his steps, and the steady posture of a man who does not doubt his choice. "I've made a decision," he began, locking eyes with each man in the room. "I've been sold a transfer to the province of Izmit, closer to the court, with greater privileges and responsibilities." A murmur swept through the chamber, a mixture of approval and expectation. "But I have decided to remain in Haraman," he said plainly. Silence. Absolute. "This province has suffered, but it has endured, and I cannot abandon it when it needs stability the most. I cannot walk away from a people who have placed their trust in me, or from a foundation that is only now beginning to heal." One of the council's elders cleared his throat, speaking with polite restraint. "And has the Sultan accepted your refusal?" Halil pulled a folded letter from his tunic and placed it on the central table. "He has, with gratitude, and with recognition for the peace that has been restored here." Heads bowed, not just before his authority, but before his loyalty to the people. Then Halil took a step toward the grand hall doors. Slowly, they opened. Dilara entered. Every man in the room stood. She did not lower her gaze. She walked forward with steady steps and stopped at Halil's side. Without hesitation, Halil pulled a carved wooden chair and placed it at his right, not behind the line of harem women, not in the space reserved for favored courtesans, at his right, as his equal. "She is my wife," he declared, "but she is also my advisor, my steady presence when duty clouds my judgment, and the voice that reminds me of what must never be forgotten. From this day forward, she will sit at this council, not as a symbol, but as part of it." Some lowered their heads, others exchanged uneasy glances, but no one dared contradict the man who had saved the province and who, with this gesture, was breaking centuries of protocol. Dilara said nothing. She simply reached for Halil's hand, slowly, and laced her fingers with his. There was no kiss, no ceremonial greeting, only a silent, undeniable union for all to see. Later, back in her chambers, Dilara opened the letter she had tarried for days.
Her handwriting was precise, her heart steady. Father, Mother, I do not expect you to understand everything that has happened, but I believe you should know. I was not sold. I was freed. In this place where I arrived as nothing more than the token of a bargain, I found the respect I never had at home. I found words that do not wound, gestures that do not humiliate, and eyes that do not demand, but ask. Halil is not just my husband. He is the man who chose to stay when everyone expected him to leave. I have sent help so my sister can leave the monastery. Soon she will be with me. Here she will have a home, not a cell disguised a sanctuary. I do not do this out of charity. I do it because I've learned that those who hold the power to act carry the responsibility to do so with justice. If one day you wish to visit me, the doors will be open, but only if you come without chains. Dilara. Nuran found her shortly after, sitting by the fountain in the inner garden, where the bougainvillea had begun to bloom with the timid spring. "Did you send it?" the older woman asked. "Yes," Dilara replied softly. "I no longer write to be understood. I write to bear witness." Halil arrived at dusk holding a freshly cut almond branch. He placed it in the vase in the common room. She watched him quietly. "Tomorrow we'll visit the southern fields. We need to assess the crops after all this rain." "I'm coming with you," she replied without hesitation. I never doubted it. They looked at each other, and in that shared pause there was no need for words. Love was no longer a promise. It was a fact. Before bedtime, they walked together through the garden, the stars reflected in the pond. No guards, no cloaks, no protocols. Just them, beneath a sky free of threats. The wind whispered through the branches. The flowers exhaled their first fragrance, and in the middle of that reclaimed serenity, Halil brushed his fingers against Dilara's hand with the same reverence one offers to something sacred. Because love, when it is true, needs no announcements, only presence. And that night, surrounded by flowers and quiet, they both understood something clear-cut. Though fate had brought them together by mistake, they had chosen each other by conviction. And in the end, that was the only thing that ever mattered.
7 years had passed since that night of flowers and promises. Ottoman, once wounded by abandonment and blind obedience, had transformed. The city walls still stood tall. The streets still echoed under the weight of caravans. But something in the air had shifted. People no longer feared power. They looked it in the eye. They demanded justice. In the heart of the palace, the council now met in a hall where women's voices were no longer tolerated whispers, but arguments that mattered. Dilara sat at the far end of the room, her hair braided, her amber dress embroidered with delicate Ottoman filigree. Her handwriting was steady as she took notes. Beside her sat a little boy, sharp-eyed, notebook open in his lap. His name was Yusuf. He was 6 years old, but he already understood more about the world than many elders in that room. His younger sister, Elif, was barefoot, running through the garden, her laughter echoing through the walls. She was 4, and from the day she was born, she had known nothing but freedom. Halil, calmer now, but no less resolute, still governed Karaman. He had declined 2 more promotions from the Sultan, not out of defiance, but because he had learned something vital. His strength didn't come from rising, but from staying. The people loved him, not out of fear, but because he walked among them without guards without excuses. One crisp autumn afternoon, as the breeze began turning the leaves to gold, Halil and Dilara sat beneath the same stone awning where, years ago, drenched from a storm, they had held hands for the very first time. The walls still bore the stains of that rain, now hidden beneath climbing honeysuckle. Yusuf slept with his head resting on his mother's lap. Elif sat beside Nuran, carefully weaving flowers into the older woman's hair. Over the years, Nuran had become something more than a guide. She was now a grandmother, a protector, living history. "Did you ever imagine we'd end up here?" Dilara asked, gently stroking Yusuf's curls. "No," I admitted, offering a quiet smile. "I thought you would leave, that you could never forgive me for the man I was in the beginning." "I didn't forgive you for who you were. I forgave you for the man you chose to become," she answered, her gaze filled with the kind of tenderness that only time can shape. The garden was quiet, not the hollow kind of silence, but the kind that only exists when the soul no longer seeks anything because it has already found everything. Little was known of Huya's fate. After her exile, she lived in a coastal city, far from the palace, far from the shadows of intrigue. They said she aged quickly, alone, stripped of title and power. She never returned, and when her name was spoken in Ottoman, it was with a mixture of pity and oblivion. Dilara's father passed away 2 years after her final letter to him. He never asked for forgiveness, never tried to reach out. But later, they learned he had left behind a chest filled with childhood keepsakes. Perhaps as an apology he was too proud to speak in life, or perhaps regret came too late. Dilara's sister Ayla lived with him. She had learned to smile again, to trust, to teach. She became the palace's teacher for young girls, and over time, a fierce voice for women's education in the region. Her sweetness had not been broken by her years of captivity. It had been tempered by it. That night, as the lanterns were lit and the stars began to embroider the sky, Halil leaned over and kissed Dilara's forehead. "You know," he whispered, "I still don't understand how you ever came to love me." She smiled, her eyes filled with a lifetime of memories. "Because in the end, you weren't the man who bought a wife. You were the man who freed a woman, and you didn't even realize it." The palace lights shimmered over the reflecting pond. Their children slept. The air smelled of dry leaves and late-blooming jasmine. And there, beneath the same sky where fate had once united them by mistake, Halil and Dilara understood, without needing words, that true love doesn't have to be perfect from the start. It only needs to be brave enough to stay. And they had stayed, together, forever. Sometimes, fate throws us onto roads we never would have chosen. But it is on those unexpected paths that we discover our true strength. The story of Dilara and Halil reminds us that love doesn't always begin with desire. Sometimes it begins with respect, with brave choices, with time shared in dignity. That there is no greater victory than transforming pain into freedom. And that true power is never imposed. It is earned with actions, with tenderness, with unwavering presence. If this story touched your heart, tell us in the comments which part moved you the most. Were you inspired by Halil's transformation or by Dilara's quiet, relentless strength? And if you made it this far, I invite you to write the word freedom in the comments. That way, I'll know you are one of those who feel every story down to the very last breath, and you help this channel continue to grow. Don't forget, up here in the cards, I've left you more stories just as powerful, filled with twists, deep emotions, and unforgettable romances. I'll be waiting for you in the next story, where maybe just maybe, you'll discover something about yourself too. Thank you for being here.